This one's ready for something harder. Keep feeding it. That is what my old librarian wrote, in pencil, in her small, careful hand, on a card I did not know existed until 1 month ago. A card she had kept on me, secretly, for 5 years, while I was the kind of lost teenager that nobody in my town expected anything good from. I found that card last month, at 53 years old, when I went back to the falling down little library of my childhood the week before they tore it down, and it rewrote the entire story of how I became who I am. I want to tell you what was on that card, and what it revealed about a quiet woman I never properly thanked, because for 38 years, I had told myself a story about my own life that turned out to be completely wrong. I had believed I saved myself. The card showed me that someone else had been saving me the whole time, deliberately, invisibly, and had never once let me see her doing it. My name is Rebecca Hale, Becca. I am 53 years old, and I am a novelist. I have written books that people have read, which is a sentence my 15-year-old self would not have believed possible. I grew up in Cumberland, Maryland, a hard town getting harder, in a house I do not need to describe in detail, except to say that it was not a place a child could grow in. I'm going to tell you what I found on that card, but first you have to understand the lost girl I was, and the one room in that town where she was safe. I have come to believe that the most dangerous time in a hard childhood is not the worst moment. It is the quiet fork, somewhere around 13 or 14, where a kid who could go either way starts, almost imperceptibly, to lean. No single dramatic thing decides it. It is 1,000 tiny pulls, toward the kids who have given up or towards something better, and at that age you do not even know you are choosing. You just drift, and the drift becomes a direction, and the direction becomes a life. I was at that fork. I can see it clearly now, from the far side of decades. I was leaning the wrong way, the way the gravity of my town wanted me to lean, and there was nothing in my home or my circumstances to pull me back. The thing that pulled me back, I always thought, was simply luck and books. I was about to learn it was a person, standing at that fork with a hand out, disguised as luck and books. I was not a child anyone bet on. I want to be honest about that, without turning it into a sob story, because the facts are just the facts. My father drank, and my mother had checked out, and our house was chaos and poverty and noise, and I was a smart kid drowning in a place that had no use for a smart kid. By 14, I was on the edge of becoming the thing my town quietly expected me to become. Another kid who dropped out, got into trouble, never left, repeated the cycle. I knew kids who went the other way, kids who were no worse than me at 13, who simply did not happen to have a warm room to hide in, or a quiet woman watching the door. I think about them too. The difference between my life and theirs was not character or intelligence, or some special spark in me. The difference was Hazel. That is the humbling thing the card forced me to accept. I am not better than the kids who did not make it out. I was luckier, but not in the way I always thought. I was lucky in exactly one specific way, that the cold drove me into the one building in town that happened to contain a woman willing to spend 5 years secretly saving whatever lost kid wandered in. Subtract her, and I am one of the ones who never left. The whole margin of my entire life is one person. I skipped school. I had a temper. I had no reason to believe my life would be anything other than small and hard, because nothing in my experience suggested otherwise. Except for one room. The public library, 2 blocks from the school, a small brick building with creaking floors, was the only warm, quiet, safe place in my whole world. I started going there to avoid going home, at first just for the warmth and the silence. And there was a librarian there. Miss Hazel, everyone called her. An older woman with reading glasses on a chain and a soft, unhurried way about her. She never made me feel like the trouble I was. She just let me be there. I think now about how much restraint that took, and how rare it is. An adult who sees a troubled, gifted kid usually wants to intervene loudly, to lecture, to mentor in a way that announces itself, to be thanked. Miss Hazel did none of that. She never sat me down and told me I had potential. She never gave me a speech about turning my life around. She never, not once, made me feel like a project she was working on, which is the fastest way to lose a kid like I was. Because a kid like I was could smell condescension from across the room and would reject any help that came with a sense of superiority attached. Instead, she gave me the one thing I could actually accept: a warm, quiet place, no questions, and a steady, invisible supply of exactly the right books. She mentored me without ever using the word, without ever letting me see it as mentoring. She understood that for some kids, the only help they can receive is the help they do not know they are receiving. That is a kind of wisdom about wounded people that I have rarely seen since, and never, at the time, recognized at all. And somewhere in those years, between the ages of 13 and 18, I went from a lost kid who hid in a library to a young woman with a future, and I left Cumberland for college on a scholarship, and I never looked back, and I built a writing life out of nothing. For 38 years, I believed I had done that myself, that I had simply, luckily, fallen in love with books, and that books had carried me out. I was about to find out how little of it was luck. I had not been back to Cumberland in decades. I had no family left there, and the town held mostly painful memories, and I had become, in the way of people who escape hard beginnings, a person defined by having left. Then a letter came, forwarded through my publisher. The town was closing the old library. The building was failing, the funding was gone, and they were demolishing it to build something else. And someone on the committee had realized that the lost girl who used to hide in that library had become a published author, and they wrote to ask if I would come back for a small farewell event and perhaps help sort through the books before the building came down. My first instinct was to decline, but something pulled at me, a debt I could not name to a place that had sheltered me, and I went. I want to be honest about my reluctance, because it is part of the lesson. For 35 years, I had built an identity on having left Cumberland, on being the one who got out, and going back felt like a kind of regression, an admission that the town still had some claim on me. Successful people who escape hard places often develop this allergy to going back. The return threatens the whole story of the escape. I almost let that allergy keep me away, and if I had, I would never have found the card. There is a warning in that. The very pride that helps us leave a hard beginning can later wall us off from the people and places that made the leaving possible, and that wall can cost us the chance to ever understand or repay what we were given. I went back grudgingly, half resentful, certain I was doing a favor to a town that had done nothing for me. I had it exactly backwards. The town, or at least one woman in it, had done everything for me. I just had to be willing to walk back through a door I had spent decades priding myself on having walked out of. I stood in that small brick building for the first time in 35 years, and it was smaller and shabbier than my memory, and it smelled exactly the same, and it undid me. Smell is the sense that does not lie, the one that goes straight past your defenses to the child you used to be. The moment I breathed in that particular mix of old paper and floor wax and radiator dust, I was 13 again, frozen and frightened, and looking for somewhere to disappear, and the decades of distance I had so carefully built simply collapsed. I had to put my hand on a shelf to steady myself. All the success, all the books with my name on them, all the careful identity of a woman who had left and never looked back. None of it was proof against the smell of the one room where she had once been safe. And standing there, swaying a little, before I had found any card or learned any secret, I already felt the first edge of the truth, that I owed this room something I had never accounted for, that my whole life had a root in this shabby little building that I had spent 35 years pretending I had grown without. And then, helping to clear out the back office, in a dented metal filing cabinet that was headed for the dumpster, I found the cards. I almost did not look in that cabinet. Someone had already labeled it for disposal. It was old patron records, useless in the digital age, nobody's job to save. I was only opening drawers out of a kind of reverent procrastination, putting off the moment I would have to leave the building for the last time. The cabinet stuck, and I almost left it stuck. If a younger volunteer had not been standing nearby and helped me wrench the bottom drawer open half as a joke, I would have walked out of that library and let the truth of my own life go to a landfill the next morning, never knowing. I think about that constantly, the narrowness of it, the whole rewriting of my story, the foundation, the visits to her grave, all of it hung on a stuck drawer and an idle afternoon and a stranger who happened to help me pull. We assume the important truths about our lives are secure, that they will keep, that they will find us. They will not. They sit in dented cabinets headed for dumpsters, and they survive, when they survive at all, by the thinnest accidents. I got mine by a margin of one stuck drawer. This was an old library, and it had never fully modernized, and Miss Hazel, long retired, I assumed, maybe long gone, had kept the old system, a card for each regular patron, tracking what they read. Most were just lists. Mine was not. I found my card by accident, flipping through the H's, Hale, Rebecca, and I pulled it out, expecting a simple list of titles. And instead, I found 5 years of my own reading history annotated in Miss Hazel's small pencil hand. Every book I had borrowed, from age 13 to 18, in order. And beside them, her notes. Not catalog notes, notes about me. I should describe the card itself, because the physical thing undid me as much as the words. It was yellowed, soft at the corners from decades in a drawer, and it was full, both sides, top to bottom, crammed with 5 years of small pencil entries. She had needed a second card, clipped behind the first, to fit it all. Most patrons, I imagine, fit a lifetime of borrowing on a single card with room to spare. I had filled 2 cards in 5 years, not because I read so much more than everyone, though I did read a lot, but because every entry of mine carried a sentence or two of her observation, her planning, her private commentary on the progress of a child she was secretly raising through literature. It was not a checkout record. It was a logbook of a 5-year rescue mission, kept by its only crew member, filed under H, in a cabinet bound for the trash. I held those 2 soft cards in my hands and understood that I was holding the single most important document of my own life, a document I had not known existed, written by a woman I had not thought about in years, about the most pivotal years I would ever live. Withdrawn today, give her quiet ones. Finished it in 2 days. She's faster than she lets on. Ready for something harder? Keep feeding it. She lit up at this one, more like it. This made her cry, the good kind. She's got the ache a writer needs. Slipped her a title, told her it came back early so she wouldn't feel singled out. Steered her off the path she was drifting toward. Books are the rope. That phrase, books are the rope, is the one I had carved onto the small new plaque, the foundation placed in the new building that replaced the library. It is the closest thing Hazel ever wrote to a statement of her philosophy, and she wrote it not in a manifesto but in pencil, in the margin of a checkout card, talking only to herself. She understood books not as decoration or luxury, but as literal rescue equipment, a rope you throw to a child who is going under. And she spent her quiet life throwing that rope to kids the current had nearly taken. I was one of the ones it pulled out. There were surely others. There must have been others, decades of them, none of whom ever knew, most of whom probably still credit luck and grit the way I did for 38 years. Somewhere out there are other people Hazel saved who will never know they were saved. I am only the one who happened to find the card. I stood in that office and read 5 years of a woman secretly, deliberately, lovingly engineering the rescue of a child she had no obligation to, and disguising every bit of it as luck so the child would never feel like a charity case. The books I thought I had stumbled onto, the ones that had cracked my life open and shown me there was a bigger world, she had chosen every single one. She had been reading me as carefully as I was reading them, and laying down a path, title by title, out of that town and toward the life I was now living, and she had made absolutely sure I never knew. I read the notes again and again, and a particular one kept stopping me cold. Slipped her a title, told her it came back early so she wouldn't feel singled out, because I remembered that. I remembered Miss Hazel saying, more than once, "Oh, this just came back. You might as well take it before it goes back on the shelf. handing me some book as if it were a happy accident of timing. I had believed her every time. I had thought I was lucky, that books kept happening to come back to the desk at the exact moment I was standing there. It was never luck. She was watching the door for me, pulling the next book before I arrived, inventing the little fiction of the early return, so that a proud, prickly kid who would have bristled at being treated as a project could take the help without ever feeling like a charity case. She had even managed my pride. She had understood, better than I understood myself, that the only way to save a kid like me was to do it so invisibly that I would think I had done it alone. The lie about the early returns was not a deception. It was the most precise act of care I have ever encountered. I sat down on the floor of that office, among the boxes of books bound for storage and the dumpster, and I wept in a way I had not wept in years. Because the whole architecture of my self-understanding was coming apart and rebuilding itself in real time. I was a person who had always taken a fierce, defensive pride in having saved myself. It was the core of my identity, the lost kid who pulled herself out by her own will and her own love of books. And here was proof, in pencil, that I had not done it alone at all. But at the exact age when I could have gone either way, a quiet woman had seen me, really seen me, and had decided, without telling a soul, to spend 5 years of her working life feeding a drowning child the precise sequence of books that would build her a way out. The love of books I had credited for my escape was not something I had found. It was something she had grown in me, on purpose, carefully. The way you tend a fire, you are determined, will not go out. I have thought a great deal about why she chose books as her method, and I think it is because books were the one gift that would keep working long after she let go of me. A meal feeds a kid once. A kind word lasts a day. But a love of reading, once it truly catches, becomes self-sustaining, a fire that feeds itself for life, that the kid carries out of the town and into every year that follows. Hazel was not just helping me survive my adolescence. She was installing in me an engine that would keep pulling me upward for the rest of my life, long after she was gone, long after I had forgotten her. And it worked exactly as she planned. I am 53, and the love of books she lit in me when I was 13 is still the central engine of my entire existence. It is, quite literally, how I earn my living and how I understand the world. She did not give me a fish or even teach me to fish. She gave me a hunger that would feed me forever. That is the most far-sighted act of love I have ever been the object of, and she planted it in a furious 13-year-old and trusted it to grow for 40 years without her ever checking whether it had. My proudest story about myself, I did this myself, was false. And strangely, learning it was false did not diminish me. It enlarged the world, because it meant I had been loved, deliberately and skillfully, by someone I had barely thanked, at the time in my life when I had been most certain that nobody saw me at all. That was the part that broke me most, sitting on that office floor. At 15, the defining feeling of my life had been invisibility. I was certain that I was unseen, that no adult was paying attention, that I could vanish from that town and no one would particularly notice. That certainty was a large part of why I was so angry, so guarded, so ready to give up, because you do not protect a future you believe no one is watching. And the whole time, in the quietest possible way, I was being watched with more attention and more care than I would receive from anyone for years. Miss Hazel saw everything. She saw which books I lingered over and which I returned unfinished, saw the days I came in raw from whatever had happened at home and needed something gentle, saw the ache in me that she correctly identified as the raw material of a writer before I had any such thought myself. I spent those years feeling invisible, and I was, in fact, being seen more completely than I have ever been seen since. The loneliest period of my life was secretly the period I was least alone. I just did not have the card yet to prove it. I asked, that day, what had become of Miss Hazel. I needed to find her. I had suddenly the most urgent need of my life to drive to wherever she was and put that card in her hands and tell her that I knew, finally, what she had done, and that it had worked, that the lost girl had become a writer, that the rope had held. She had died. 11 years ago. The woman on the committee told me gently. Miss Hazel had stayed in Cumberland her whole life, had worked at that library until she was nearly 80, had never married, had no children, and had been, in her last years, mostly forgotten, the way small-town librarians are. That word, forgotten, has haunted me since. Here was a woman who, as far as I now know, may have saved more than one lost kid in that town across a 40-year career, who poured herself quietly into the children no one else bothered with, and who ended her life in a care home with a small funeral and a flat stone, mostly unremembered. The people who do the most invisible good are, almost by definition, the ones least likely to be remembered for it, because they spent their whole lives making sure no one saw them do it. The loud benefactors get the buildings named after them. The Miss Hazels get a filing cabinet headed for the dumpster. And it struck me, hard, that if I had not happened to come back the week before the demolition, that cabinet would have been thrown away, and the last physical proof of what she did for me would have gone to a landfill, and her quiet work would have vanished as completely as if it had never happened. The good she did was nearly erased twice over, once by her own secrecy, and once by the simple forgetting that small towns do to their quiet saints. She had died in a care facility, quietly, and there had been a small funeral. 11 years ago. I had been alive and findable, and published for all 11 of those years, and she had been a 2-hour drive away, and I had never gone back, because I had been so busy being the woman who escaped that I never returned to thank the place, and the person, that had made the escaping possible. I keep doing a particular kind of cruel arithmetic. My first novel came out 15 years ago. She died 11 years ago, which means there were 4 years, 4 whole years, when I was a published novelist and Hazel was alive, 2 hours away, quite possibly aware, in a small town that surely talked, that the lost Hale girl had written a book. 4 years in which a single drive, a single letter, a single phone call would have let me put it in her hands and say, "You did this, and it worked. Look." 4 years, and I used none of them, because it never crossed my mind that I owed anyone the visit. I thought the book was mine. I did not yet know it was half hers. The card would have told me if I had ever gone looking, but I did not go looking, because you do not investigate a debt you do not believe you have. Those 4 overlapping years are the sharpest grief in this whole story. Not that I never could have thanked her, but that I easily could have, and simply did not, because I did not yet know to. I will carry that for the rest of my life. She built me, and she died 11 years ago in a care home 100 miles from me, having no idea, I assume, that her lost girl had become exactly what those pencil notes had hoped for. Or, and this is the thought I cling to, maybe she did know. Maybe she saw my name on a book sometime in those last years, in a catalog, in a review, and knew. I will never find out. That is the price of the 38 years I spent never going back. I have tried to forgive myself for those years, and it is hard, but I have landed somewhere I can live with. The truth is that I could not have thanked her sooner, because I did not know until last month that there was anything to thank her for. For 38 years, I genuinely believed the books had been luck. You cannot thank someone for a gift you do not know they gave you. So my failure was not ingratitude, exactly. It was a failure to be curious, a failure to ever turn around and ask how, really, did a kid like me get out. I took my own escape for granted, filed it under personal grit, and never investigated it. And because I never investigated it, I never found the card while she was alive to receive my thanks. The lesson there is sharper than simple gratitude. It is that we should be suspicious of our own success stories, the flattering ones where we did it all ourselves. Those stories are almost always missing someone, and the time to go looking for the missing person is now, while they can still hear you, not 38 years later, at a flat stone in a cemetery in a town you swore you would never return to. I did the only thing left to do. I took the card. The committee let me keep it, and I have it framed now in my writing room, where I see it every day above my desk. And I did something else, something that has become the center of the rest of my life. I went to the funeral home that had handled her service, 11 years late, and I found where she was buried, in a modest plot in Cumberland with a small flat stone. And I went and I sat with her, the way you do, and I told her everything. I told her I'd found the card. I told her I knew now that none of it had been luck. I read her some of her own notes back to her, the way I'd once read her recommended books in her own library, and I said the thank you that was 11 years too late to reach her ears, but that I needed to say anyway. I do not know if the dead hear us. I am not a particularly religious woman, but I have decided it does not matter whether she heard it, because the saying of it was not really for her. It was for me, and for the 13-year-old I had been, who deserved to know, finally, that she had been seen and chosen and loved by an adult in a year when she believed she was no one. I sat on the grass and told that grass everything, and I cried. And then, this is the strange part, I laughed, because I imagined what Hazel would have made of all this fuss. She would have hated it. She would have waved it off, told me not to be dramatic, said she had only done her job, said the books did the work, and she just shelved them. She was the kind of woman who could not abide being thanked, which is exactly why she made sure, for 5 years, that there was nothing for me to thank her for. Even sitting at her grave, I could feel her gentle objection to the whole scene. And that, somehow, was the most comforting part of all, that she was, even in my imagining of her, completely consistent, completely herself, completely unwilling to take the credit she had earned more than almost anyone I have ever known. And then I did the thing I think she would have wanted more than any thank you. I started a foundation in her name, a small one, funded by my books, that puts librarians and mentors into exactly the kind of failing small-town schools and libraries that I came from, to find the lost kids and feed them the rope, the way she fed it to me. I went to see one of them work, this past spring, in a town in West Virginia, not unlike Cumberland, the kind of place the country has mostly written off. There was a librarian there, a quiet young woman the foundation had helped place, and she did not know I was watching from the next aisle when a kid came in, maybe 14, guarded, angry in the particular way I recognized in my own bones, a kid clearly hiding from something at home. And I watched the librarian do the thing. Not a speech, not a lecture, just a warm nod, no questions. And then, a few minutes later, "Oh, this just came back. You might as well take it before it goes back on the shelf," handing the kid a book as if it were an accident of timing. The exact move. Hazel's exact move, taught now to a stranger, performed on a new lost kid, 60 years and 3 states away from where it was used on me. I had to leave the building so the young librarian would not see me cry. The rope is being thrown again. That is the only monument Hazel would ever have wanted, and it is the one I can actually build. Because the only real way to thank someone who quietly saved you is to quietly save someone else. I named it the Hazel Pruitt Fund. And the first thing I insisted on, the thing the lawyers found odd, was that the mentors at places should be told to do their work quietly. Not to announce themselves to the kids as saviors. Not to make the children feel like projects. To find the lost ones and feed them the rope the way Hazel fed it to me, invisibly, letting them keep the credit. Letting them believe in their own strength. Because I learned something from that card about how rescue actually works for a proud, wounded kid. The help has to be hidden, or the kid cannot take it. The visible kind of help, the kind that wants gratitude, often cannot reach the children who need it most, because those children have too much pride and too little trust to accept it. Hazel knew that. She built her whole method around it. And so the foundation, in her name, tries to teach a new generation of quiet adults the thing she never wrote down anywhere except in the spaces between book titles, that the deepest help is the kind the helped person never sees. That was a few months ago. The library is gone now. They tore it down in the spring. I went back one more time, the day before the demolition, and stood on the empty floor where the stacks had been, and where, somewhere, a 13-year-old me had first picked up a book that a woman had left there on purpose. They let me take a single brick from the building afterward, and it sits on my desk now beside the framed card, a piece of the actual walls that sheltered me. People found it sentimental, I think, a writer wanting a brick. But that building was the first home that was actually safe, and the woman inside it was the first adult who actually saw me, and between the two of them, they are most of the reason I am alive and well and writing this at all. You are allowed to grieve a building. You are allowed to keep a brick. Some rooms hold more of who you became than the houses you grew up in, and that little failing library held nearly all of me. But the card is on my wall, and the foundation is funded, and there are this year 3 Miss Hazels in 3 hard little towns, watching for the lost kids and laying down ropes of books. I think about her constantly now, in a way I never did in the decades when I was busy being self-made. I understand, finally, that I was never self-made. I was Hazel-made, and luck had nothing to do with it. Every time I sit down to write a book, the thing that is my whole life, the thing that pulled me out of that town, I am doing the thing a quiet woman with pencil and reading glasses planned for me when I was a furious, frightened 13-year-old hiding from the cold. She bet everything on me, silently, for 5 years, and asked for nothing, and never told me, and let me believe I'd done it all myself, because she understood that a lost kid needs to believe in her own strength more than she needs to feel indebted. That is the most generous thing anyone has ever done for me. She gave me the rescue and let me keep the credit. I only wish I'd turned the card over 38 years sooner. I want to leave you with the 2 things this taught me. The first is about the story of being self-made, which our culture loves, and which I built my whole identity on. Almost no one is self-made. The people who escape hard beginnings, who become more than their start, almost always did it because somewhere along the way, one adult, a teacher, a librarian, a coach, a neighbor, quietly decided to invest in them, and often did it so subtly that the child never knew, and grew up believing in their own bootstraps. There is nothing wrong with believing in your own strength. Miss Hazel wanted me to. But there is something important about, at some point, turning around and looking for the hands that were on your back the whole time. You were almost certainly pushed, by someone, more gently and more deliberately than you ever realized. Find out who. The truth does not make you weaker. It makes you grateful, which is a kind of strength the self-made story never lets you have. The second thing is more urgent, and it is the regret I will carry forever. So let me hand it to you instead. Go back and thank them while they are still alive. I waited 38 years, and Miss Hazel died 11 of them before I understood what I owed her, and there is now no version of events in which she ever hears it from my lips. Do not do what I did. There is, almost certainly, a person in your past who quietly built some part of who you are, and you have probably never told them, because at the time you did not see it, and now you are busy, and they are far away, and there is always more time. There is not always more time. Somewhere there is a person who quietly built you and never took the credit. Find them and say thank you while you still can. If this story landed for you, drop the word borrowed in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. And if a teacher or a librarian or some quiet adult is on your mind right now, go and tell them. Don't wait the 38 years I waited. Subscribe for new stories. Real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one. Before I go. First, almost no one is truly self-made. The people who escape hard beginnings and become more than their start almost always did it because somewhere along the way, one adult quietly decided to invest in them, often so subtly that the child never knew and grew up crediting their own bootstraps. There is nothing wrong with believing in your own strength. The best mentors want you to. But at some point, it is worth turning around and looking for the hands that were on your back the whole time. You were almost certainly pushed, more gently and deliberately than you ever realized. Find out who. The truth will not make you weaker. It will make you grateful, which is a strength the self-made story never lets you have. Second, go back and thank them while they are still alive. I waited 38 years, and the woman who built me died 11 of them before I understood what I owed her, And now there is no version of events where she hears it from me. Do not do what I did. There is almost certainly someone in your past who quietly built some part of who you are, and you have probably never told them because you did not see it at the time, and now you are busy, and they are far away, and there always seems to be more time. There is not always more time. Somewhere there is a person who quietly built you and never took the credit. Find them and say thank you while you still can. Somewhere there is a person who quietly built you and never took the credit. Find them and say thank you while you still can. I'll see you next time.